The message arrived at precisely the wrong moment, which in his experience was the only kind of moment the universe ever used. He was attempting to fix a food synthesizer that had decided, with quiet determination, that everything should now taste like mildly offended cabbage. When the wall flickered and the seal of the Interstellar Council burned itself into existence, he assumed it was a malfunction. Either that, or the machine had finally developed a sense of humor. He wiped his hands on a cloth that had long since given up on cleanliness and stared at the projection. "If this is about the cabbage," he muttered, "I'd like to formally blame the cabbage." The projection did not laugh, which felt rude. Instead, a voice emerged, measured, echoing the kind of voice that probably practiced being important. He was informed that he had been selected, not chosen, not invited, selected. As if he were a particularly average fruit that had finally met the minimum criteria for being noticed. The words "prestigious reward" were repeated twice, just in case he failed to understand that something remarkable was happening to someone profoundly unremarkable. He checked behind him to see if there was a more impressive person standing there. There was, just the cabbage machine which he was beginning to suspect had arranged this out of spite. "Right," he said slowly, "you've got the wrong guy." The projection insisted it did not. This was, in many ways, worse. The transport arrived before he could argue further, because the galaxy had a well-documented habit of moving forward without waiting for his consent. One moment he was in a room that smelled faintly of disappointment and vegetables, and the next he was standing on a platform suspended in the kind of emptiness that made philosophical thoughts unavoidable. The stars stretched endlessly, cold and indifferent, as if they had seen this sort of thing before and were unimpressed. He straightened his jacket, which immediately wrinkled in protest. "Prestigious reward," he whispered to himself. "Could be a medal, could be money, could be a slightly better cabbage." A line of hovering drones drifted past him, humming in synchronized tones that suggested they had rehearsed this. He briefly considered applauding them. No one else seemed inclined to. The station itself emerged slowly from the darkness, not so much appearing as deciding to exist where it hadn't a moment before. It was carved into an asteroid with an unsettling precision, smooth surfaces broken only by narrow seams of dim light. It didn't look welcoming. It looked patient. He stepped forward because standing still felt like admitting defeat. Inside, the silence was immediate and complete, pressing against him from all sides. Even his footsteps seemed to reconsider making noise. He tried to think of something heroic to say, just in case someone was watching, but his mind offered only, "Hello," which did not feel like the kind of statement that would inspire legends. "Hello," he said anyway. The station did not respond, which was consistent with its personality so far. He moved deeper, guided by lights that flickered on just before he reached them, as if the place was reluctantly acknowledging his presence. The air was cool, sterile, carrying no scent, no trace of life. It felt less like entering a building and more like stepping into a thought that wasn't entirely his own. "Prestigious," he repeated, a little less confidently this time. Definitely prestigious, very quiet. He tried to imagine what awaited him. A council chamber, perhaps. Applause. A speech he would forget halfway through. The kind of recognition that would make all the years of being overlooked suddenly feel like a clever setup rather than an ongoing condition. Instead, he found a room. It was vast, but not in a comforting way. The kind of vastness that made you aware of how small you were and then politely refused to elaborate. At its center stood nothing. No podium, no audience, no reassuring sign that anyone had planned this event beyond bringing him here. "Excellent," he said softly. "A minimalist ceremony, very fashionable." The lights dimmed. He froze, which he would later decide was not his most strategic decision, but it was the one his body had selected without consulting him. The air shifted, subtle but undeniable, like the moment before a storm decides to introduce itself. Then she was there. He did not see her arrive. One moment the space was empty and the next it was not. She stood several paces away, perfectly still, as if movement were an unnecessary luxury. At first glance, she looked human. That was the problem. Too precise, too composed, as though someone had studied humanity carefully and then removed everything inconvenient. Her ears were long, extending gracefully past what should have been possible, curving slightly backward in a way that suggested they were designed for something more than hearing. They gave her an outline that refused to settle into familiarity, a constant reminder that whatever she resembled, she was not. He smiled, because it seemed like the kind of thing a person should do when meeting a prestigious reward. "Hello," he said again, with slightly more effort this time. "I feel like I'm saying that a lot today." She did not respond. Her eyes rested on him with an intensity that felt less like attention and more like evaluation. Not who he was, but what he was. The distinction became clear in a way that made his smile falter, just a little. "Right," he continued, because silence was quickly becoming his least favorite participant in the conversation. "I'm going to assume you're the reward, which is impressive, very prestigious, extremely quiet." "Nothing." He shifted his weight, suddenly aware of his heartbeat, of the way it seemed louder than it had any right to be. Her head tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly, and her ears, those long, elegant ears, moved with a subtle precision, as if adjusting to a frequency he could not hear. "Oh," he said softly, the realization arriving not as a revelation but as a slow, creeping certainty. "You can hear that, can't you?" Her gaze did not change, but something in the air did, tightening, focusing. He laughed, a short, uncertain sound. That's new, for me, not for you, I assume. You seem very experienced in the field of hearing things." Still nothing. The word slipped into his mind, uninvited, unwelcome, and entirely accurate. Predator. It settled there, heavy and undeniable, reshaping everything that had come before it. The ceremony, the drones, the word reward. They rearranged themselves into something else, something that made a terrible kind of sense. He exhaled slowly. "I'm starting to think," he said carefully, "that this might not be a reward in the traditional sense." She took a step forward. It was a small movement, almost nothing, and yet it changed the entire room. The distance between them shrank, and with it, any lingering illusion he had been invited here for celebration. He raised a hand, not in defense, but in a gesture that felt like it might delay the inevitable by a fraction of a second. "Before we continue," he said, his voice steadier than he felt, "I'd just like to point out that I am widely considered to be a very disappointing meal." For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not amusement, not quite, but something close enough to uncertainty that it felt like a victory. It was a very small victory. He decided to hold on to it anyway. She did not take another step. That, more than anything, felt deliberate. He had expected movement, a sudden blur, something fast and final that would make his last thought embarrassingly mundane. Instead, she paused, as if his sentence had interrupted something older than him, something instinctive that had never needed interruption before. He lowered his hand slowly. "Good," he said under his breath. "We're negotiating, that's promising." Historically, negotiations are slightly better than being eaten immediately. Her eyes remained on him, unwavering, precise. The silence stretched again, but it had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. By thought, by calculation, by something that was trying to understand him the way one might examine a tool that refused to behave like a tool. He cleared his throat. "I'm going to keep talking," he decided, nodding once as if he had just approved his own strategy. "Not because I think it will help, but because the alternative is standing here quietly, and I have a strong suspicion that quiet people don't last long around you." Nothing, not even the courtesy of disapproval. He shifted slightly, resisting the urge to step back. "You're very still," he added, as if offering helpful feedback. "I don't know if anyone else told you that. It's impressive." Unsettling, but impressive. If there were an award for standing in one place and making someone question their entire existence, you would win it. Ironically, that might actually be a prestigious reward. Her head tilted again, just a fraction. The movement was so minimal it could have been imagined, except for the way her ears followed it, adjusting with a smooth, controlled precision that made his skin prickle. "Right," he said, pointing lightly in her direction. That's what I mean. The ears. They move like they're listening to things I can't hear, which is, frankly, rude. If there's a conversation happening, I feel like I should be included." Her gaze sharpened, not in anger but in focus. He could feel it now, the weight of her attention narrowing, isolating details. His breathing, his posture, the tiny shifts in his expression. It was as if she were mapping him, piece by piece, building a complete understanding from fragments. He swallowed. "I'd like to formally apologize for my heartbeat," he said quickly. "It's doing its best, but it lacks subtlety." One of her ears angled slightly toward his chest. He froze. "Yes," he whispered. "That's exactly what I was afraid of." The room seemed smaller now, not physically but perceptually. Every sound he made, every movement, every involuntary reaction, it all felt amplified, exposed. He had the distinct and deeply uncomfortable realization that nothing about him was hidden. Not to her. "So," he continued, forcing a thin smile, "you can hear my heart. That's efficient. Saves time, I suppose. No need for introductions. You already know I'm nervous, slightly confused, and reconsidering every life choice that led me here." She took another step. Again it was measured, controlled, almost careful. Not the advance of something impatient, but the approach of something curious. That word returned, unwelcome but persistent. Curious. He exhaled slowly. "I'm going to interpret that as interest," he said. "Not the dangerous kind, the academic kind, like you're studying me, which is flattering in a terrifying way. I've never been anyone's subject before. Unless you count that one time I volunteered for a sleep experiment and woke up more tired than I started." Her eyes flickered, just slightly, just enough to confirm that something in his words had registered beyond sound. He blinked. "Did you just react?" he asked quietly, leaning forward a fraction. "Or am I hallucinating early?" No answer, but the silence felt different again. He let out a short breath that might have been a laugh if it had been less uncertain. "All right," he said, nodding to himself. "We're making progress. Minimal, possibly imaginary progress, but I'm choosing to believe in it. It's a coping mechanism." She stopped a few steps away from him now, close enough that he could see the fine details he had tried not to notice before. The stillness of her expression wasn't empty, it was controlled. Nothing moved unless she allowed it to, not even the smallest reflex, except the ears. They shifted again, subtle, responsive, alive in a way the rest of her was not. Tracking, adjusting, listening. "To be clear," he said carefully, "this is the part where you would normally do something dramatic, right? Sudden movement, decisive action, very efficient conclusion to my day. I've read about this. Not in detail. I tend to avoid literature that feels personally relevant." She did not move. He frowned slightly. "You're not doing it." "Nothing. You're really not doing it." The realization settled in slowly, like a thought that didn't quite trust itself yet. "You're waiting," he said, his voice quieter now. Her gaze held his. "For what?" he asked. Silence answered, but it no longer felt like an absence. It felt like a question. He hesitated, then let out a breath. "Oh," he murmured, "you're not waiting for something, you're watching." The distinction mattered. He shifted his stance, not retreating, not advancing, just adjusting. "You want to see what I do?" Her head tilted again, just slightly. He nodded slowly. "That's new," he said. "For both of us, I think." A strange, fragile thread of understanding began to form, stretched thin between them. He could feel it, not as something solid, but as a possibility. A narrow path where there should have been none. "Well," he said, straightening a little, "that changes things." He took a small step to the side. Her eyes followed instantly. Her ears adjusted, tracking the shift with unnerving precision. "Right," he said, "definitely watching." He glanced around the room, then back at her. In that case, I feel like I should perform, not in a dramatic way. I don't have the range for that, but perhaps something modest, a demonstration of survival instincts. He paused, considering. Although, to be honest, my survival instincts mostly involve leaving. He took another small step. She did not stop him. He blinked. You're allowing this. Another step, slow, deliberate, still nothing. He let out a quiet breath. Okay, he said softly, that's interesting. He stopped, turning back to face her fully. You're not hunting, he realized. Not yet. Her expression did not change, but the air shifted again, tightening around the words. Which means, he continued, his voice steadier now, this isn't about whether you can kill me. A faint pause, almost imperceptible. It's about whether you will. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before it. He met her gaze, holding it despite every instinct urging him not to. And that, he said quietly, feels like a test. For the first time, something unmistakable passed through her expression. Not hunger, not boredom, recognition. He exhaled slowly, a small, uncertain smile forming despite himself. Right, he murmured. A test. He glanced down at himself briefly, then back up. I should warn you, he added. I was never particularly good at those. Her ears shifted once more, precise and attentive. He took a breath, steadying himself. But I suppose, he said, I don't have the option of failing quietly. The room held its breath with him. And for the first time, he had the distinct and deeply unsettling feeling that the outcome was not decided. He let the word linger between them, as if saying it too quickly might break whatever fragile understanding had formed. A test. Not a hunt, not a ceremony, not a reward, at least not in any way he had originally imagined. Something quieter, more precise, more dangerous in a way that didn't rely on speed or strength. Well, he said after a moment, rubbing the back of his neck, I always suspected my life would eventually become an exam I didn't study for. I just thought there would be more paperwork. She didn't move, but her attention sharpened again, narrowing on him like a lens adjusting focus. Her ears shifted slightly, angled toward him, not just listening to his words now, but to the spaces between them. He exhaled slowly, then took a step, not away, not toward her, but forward in a way that felt intentional rather than instinctive. All right, he continued, voice steadier than before. If this is a test, then I assume there are rules. Unspoken, mysterious, probably unfair rules. That feels on brand for the galaxy. No reaction. Or, he added, lifting a finger slightly, there are no rules, which is worse. Much worse, I prefer rules. Rules mean you can accidentally succeed. He began to walk, slow and deliberate, circling slightly, not to escape but to think. The room seemed to follow him, or perhaps he was finally noticing how it responded, the faint shifts in light, the subtle hum beneath the silence. You've never hesitated before, he said, glancing at her. That's the story, isn't it? Legendary, unstoppable, terrifying, very consistent. I respect consistency. I've been consistently unimpressive for years. Her gaze tracked him, unblinking. But now you are, he continued, stopping and facing her again. Hesitating, not because you can't act, but because you're choosing not to, which means something changed. He placed a hand lightly against his chest. And unless there's someone else here I haven't noticed, which would be rude, by the way, I think that something is me. The words settled into the space, uncertain but persistent. He let out a small breath that almost became a laugh. That's new, he admitted. For both of us, I think. I've never been the reason a legendary predator reconsiders anything. Usually I'm the reason people reconsider, inviting me to things. Her head tilted again, a fraction deeper this time. The movement carried a weight it hadn't before, less mechanical, more engaged. He nodded slowly. Right, he murmured. So that's it. That's the test. Not whether I can fight you, which, to be clear, I cannot. Not whether I can run, which I suspect would end very quickly and very poorly. It's whether I can disrupt you. He spread his hand slightly. Which, again, feels like a strange skill to reward. but I'm not in charge of the criteria." The silence held, but it no longer pressed against him. It waited. He took a breath, then stepped closer. It was not a large movement, but it was deliberate. A choice made fully aware of the consequences it could carry. His heartbeat quickened immediately, betraying him in the most enthusiastic way possible. Her ears reacted at once, angling toward him, refining their focus. "Yes, I know," he said quietly. "Very dramatic, I'm aware." He stopped within a distance that felt significant, not safe, but not entirely fatal. "You're listening to my fear," he said, "measuring it, understanding it, but you're also waiting to see what I do with it." Her gaze held his. He swallowed, then gave a small, uneven smile. "That's unfortunate for you," he said, "because I have no idea what I'm doing." A pause, then softly, almost thoughtfully, he added, "But I'm not leaving." The words seemed to settle deeper than anything he had said before. He let out a breath, steadying himself. "I could try," he continued. "I could run or hide or beg, all very traditional responses, very expected, but you're not interested in expected, are you?" Her stillness sharpened. He shook his head slightly. "No, you've seen that before, countless times, I imagine. Same reactions, same endings, efficient, predictable." He met her gaze, holding it despite the instinct screaming at him to look away. "I think you're bored." The word hung there, fragile and dangerous. For a moment nothing changed. Then something did. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. But it was undeniable. A shift in her expression, subtle but real, as if a thought had reached a place it had never gone before. He blinked, then let out a quiet, incredulous breath. "That worked," he whispered. "I cannot believe that worked." He straightened slightly, a faint, cautious confidence threading into his posture. "You've lived too long without surprise," he said. "Without anything that makes you stop, and now you have something that does." He gestured lightly to himself. "Again, not my most impressive achievement, but I'll take it." She moved, not toward him, not away. Just shifted, her stance altering in a way that broke the perfect symmetry she had held since the beginning. It was small, almost insignificant, but it was a choice. He watched her carefully, then nodded once. "So that's it," he said softly. "That's the answer. I don't win by overpowering you. I don't survive by escaping you. I survive by being inconvenient." A faint smile touched his lips. "I've trained for that my entire life without realizing it." Her ears adjusted again, but slower now, less precise, as if they were listening not just for sound but for meaning. He took a step back this time, not retreating but easing the space between them. "You're not going to kill me," he said. It wasn't a question. The silence that followed confirmed it more clearly than any words could have. He let out a long breath, tension unwinding in a way that felt almost unreal. "All right," he murmured. "That's good, that's very good." He glanced around the room, then back at her. "So what happens now? Do I get a certificate, a small plaque? 'Congratulations, you confused a legendary predator.' I'd hang that somewhere prominent." No answer, he smiled slightly. "No plaque, that's fine, I'll remember it." She watched him, her gaze no longer purely analytical. There was something else there now, something quieter, less defined. Not hunger. Not curiosity exactly, consideration. He nodded once as if acknowledging it. "I think," he said slowly, "this was the reward, not